and greetings. And first of all, sorry for the recent technical problems, but hopefully, keep Kim fingers crossed, it's all been sorted out. Now, this evening we ask, should environmental lobby groups be renamed Ignorance Are Us? During the recent elections, an environmental circular dropped through my letterbox. It showed a bunch of sad people dressed like a bag of soiled clothing that had been rejected by a charity shop. What was being promoted was fake environmental concerns to allegedly promote UN Agenda 2030 via the back door, and it had nothing about real environmental issues. Here to discuss this fake environmentalism is Mark Windows. Now, Mark, what's happening?
Well, it's interesting, Chris, because looking at the environmental movement, it goes back to the sort of early 19th century and this idea that we were getting too industrialized. And we had things like the RSPB, the Royal Society for the Perfection, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. And after that, it started to get a bit more politicized. And then you had this group that came out of a thing called Earth Day in 1970. And that's where things started to get radical. And that's where these groups started to get more corporate and co-opted. And after that, of course, you got Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth. Now, this is very interesting because that Earth Day was basically the start of it all. Then you got this thing called Earth First, and they're still around, and they're a lobbying group. They're a very extreme environmental group, and they bring court cases, and they're behind a lot of the activism that's going on. And now what you've got is a corporate infrastructure for this activism. In other words, the whole thing's been corporatized and it's become part of an industry. In fact, there's the green industrial complex, which actually permeates everything, which is why a multi-billionaire, Maurice Strong, saw an opportunity here in the late 80s. And he started off lobbying the United Nations about this idea of this thing that was to be called sustainable development. And sustainable development was about a mixture of environmentalism and development. So you had this kind of mixture of the two, and we can get into that as we go along. We've talked about it in previous shows, but what we've got here is actually a control and management system for all infrastructure, which affects the livelihood of people on the whole planet. And that's where we are today. So in other words, the whole thing's been hijacked. It's not about environmentalism. It's about lobbying for global governance. So people go, well, how could that be? What's wrong with saving the planet? Nothing's wrong with saving the planet, but the green environmental movement now has nothing to do with conservation. So I think that's a really good place to start, Chris.
That's right. I mean, for example, when I got this environmental thing through my letterbox, nothing about G5, nothing at all. Nothing about what they're spraying over the top of us, these chemtrails, nothing there. And nothing about fracking. Although that has become very, shall we say, politicised now, isn't it? I'm not quite sure what to think about fracking now. But it's avoiding, shall we say, the main issues, because I'm very concerned about pollution, as most people should be. But have you noticed that nowadays with these green activists and that, they say nothing about pollution. It's always about what humans are doing to the earth to destroy it. But there's nothing about pollution. Now, yes, I want.
They're actually following a narrative. You see, the thing is, there's a difference between climate, weather, and pollution, and the three get mixed up. And it's very useful to mix the three up, because what's happened is a general dumbing down of the way people view this. So they'll see things like, oh, there's loads of plastic in the oceans. And they'll mix pollution up with climate change. Now, all of this stuff is actually brought into the public attention. So when you want to promote something, you start making documentaries about it, and people go, what do you mean they start making documentaries about it? Well, look, everything has a narrative and everything's funded. And the thing is about this environmentalism is that it's a huge business, and people like Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace are merely lobbying groups for the industry. Now, people go, well, why do they do all this activism? When in actual fact, they don't, because all of the climate activism around the world is absolutely controlled by corporations. So you won't get real climate activism. And I think I'd like to get into that tonight, because I've covered a lot of these protests in the UK. for instance, things like the fracking movement, absolutely completely taken over by government people. And what they do is they embed themselves. Now it's going to be the HS2. That's going to be the next environmental protest. And guess what? The people from the HS2 are the ones who've just left the fracking camp. Now, where did the people from the fracking camps come from? I'm not talking about the people I know who were genuinely protesting down there in places like Preston New Road, but the people from Occupy, who were the paid activists and the agitators and agents of Occupy, went into fracking. They've now moving on to HS2. How do I know this? Because I know people who are on the front line of these protests. And what happens is the protests get taken over. You don't really think that the government's going to allow people to congregate outside these building sites, putting themselves and other people in danger without correct supervision. Well, let's take it a step further. You embed your own activists in there, and your own activists get rid of anybody who might be a problem. In other words, anyone who might be a real activist. So everything's fake, yeah.
Yeah, you're right there. Because what's happened to the ozone layer? I mean, I remember in the 1980s, we was all worried that there's a big hole in the ozone layer, which is going to kill us all. Also, acid rain. What's happened to acid rain? That's sort of died a death, hasn't it? And
well, yeah, because it depends where the rain falls, you see, because it depends where they've got the Pacific and the Atlantic. In the Pacific, you've got more volcanoes. And this is the thing, that they talk about acid rain and acidification of the oceans. They put all this stuff together. But after acid rain, of course, because that was all meant to be about pollution and environmental pollution, they brought in this idea of acidification of the oceans. Well, the acidification of the oceans is due to the volcanoes. Now, you never hear any of this, but when you actually talk to marine biologists who know what they're talking about, then you'll find this. And this is the thing about the green movement generally, that people who may start out well-meaning, all they do, they get locked into things that are basically corporate. And when you try and explain this to them, they say you're a sort of fascist or something, or you must have voted. You're the sort of bloke who votes for Boris. You're the sort of bloke who knows nothing about Europe and voted for Brexit. You're the sort of bloke who's a right-wing extremist. And this is what they've done. And I've a great kind of comedy about this recently, because I threw some truth bullets into a kind of arena where they were going on, we've only got 50 years to the end of the world. It was some plank who'd put something in the Independent, with no foundation evidence. They just throw it together, a lot of hearsay kind of ideas, and put it in there. And a lot of these things are funded by the Rockefellers. If you go to the Guardian, for instance, all the stuff about population reduction, the fact that we're a curse on the planet, is coming from the Rockefellers. So I mean, the whole point is, it's all about money. The green agenda is about money and control and management of human population, and it's got very little to do with conservation. It's got a lot to do with closing off large areas of land like the World Wildlife Fund. Basically, they say they're trying to stop poachers and all this sort of stuff. But when you look at the political side of what's going on with these groups, they're basically land grabbing and asset grabbing, and really sort of this rewilding project is all about getting people off the land. I think, why would they want to do that? Because they want more people in cities. So everything to do with environmentalism is an absolute fraud, because the people who are genuine in it get pushed out, marginalized, and they will not get a word in edgeways. So you've got your lobbyists at the top. In the 70s, you had people like David Suzuki, who knows nothing about anything. And then they even used that girl, Cullis Suzuki. I don't know whether that was his daughter, but in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit, they dragged this girl out, and she was basically the Greta Thunberg of her day, saying, why aren't you listening to us? We're the future, and all the rest of it. And now we've got this militarized kind of version of it, which is eco-fascism, people call it, but fascism is nothing like as bad as these people are,
I agree with you. I mean, I'm old enough, even though I look exceptionally young, I'm old enough to remember in the late 60s, the BBC had nothing but documentaries on how Venice will disappear by 1980 under the sea. And we had this soft music, and you see like a steeple coming out the top of this ocean, and saying, "This will be Venice in 1980. Please send money to save Venice." I think it was Malcolm Muggeridge. Well, I think that it's such a shame to lose Venice and all that. That's how he used to speak. And not very good impersonation anyway. And then all of a sudden, in about the mid-70s, it disappeared. And so did the knowledge of where all that money went to. And as far as I know, I think Venice is still there. It hasn't disappeared. And so that was a big rip-off.
Chris, news just in.
Yes. Good heavens.
1986. It's going to get 3 to 4 degrees warmer by 2020. But how come it's only 0.8 degrees above Industrial Revolution time? Because we're going into a slightly warming period because we're coming out of an ice age, you know. I think this is the sort of thing. And there's loads of these things here. We've got loads of them. We've got civilization will end within 15 or 30 years unless immediate action is taken against problems facing mankind. That was on Earth Day 1970. Whoa. So, we are in an environmental crisis which threatens the survival of this nation and of the world as a suitable place of human habitation. This is what I'm talking about, Earth Day. That's when all this kind of scaremongering started. That's when it turned into a dystopian nightmare, you know.
Well, that's right. In the 19th century, leading scientists said that, and this was in the early 19th century, trains will not be able to go over 15 miles per hour because people will be sucked out of the carriages, or they won't be able to breathe because there'll be lack of air.
Well, it's funny you mention that, Chris, because when we were in Glastonbury and the Glastonbury Town Council were talking about 5G, there was one of the councillors, and I will do an impersonation of his voice because it's quite funny, goes, well, what we need to do is we need to get hold of the facts because we haven't really got the facts of this yet. Well, I don't know much about 5G. Well, in the Victorian times, they thought if you went more than 50 miles an hour, your head would explode. This is the level of sort of intellect that you're dealing with, you know.
Well, that's right. And the other one was, I think it's an 1880 government report said that by 1920, Londoners will have to wade through 4 feet of horse manure due to the amount of carriages and what do they call them now? Those carriages, the taxi carriages that they had.
Oh yes, coach and 4.
That's right, coach and 4. Because the amount of horses and the increase in the amount of horses, we'll be wading through horse manure. I don't think that happened somehow.
Well, it apparently did in Smithfield. Charles Dickens said it wasn't 4 feet high though, but he said this stench of the cattle was reeking, and it was the steam was rising off the ground as he took Oliver Twist through there where they used to sell all the cattle. So I can imagine it was quite smelly, but I don't think it was on those sort of proportions that you're talking about. Yeah, by the year 2000, 30 years from now, the entire world, with the exception of Western Europe, North America and Australia, will be in famine. Well, the only famines that you get are induced by green genocidal policy, because what's happening now is the UN are taking control of food supplies. This is what's happening in some ways with Australia, because they privatized the water in the Murray-Darling Basin, and there's a water rationing on, and all of this stuff contributes. Now, the thing is about these forest fires is that they've been created by arsonists, and people still think it's just the weather. Now, they're talking about this increase in temperature, which, okay, so you've got an increase in temperature, but when did records begin? You have to go back 100 years. Then you can actually go back to 1,000 years now. Now, remember that the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, create models and projections, none of which have ever come true. It's just computer models. So when people say 97% of scientists agree, you say, well, what do they actually agree on? 97% of scientists would never agree on anything. So what are 97% agreeing on? Well, they're not agreeing on that at all. What they're actually agreeing on is that man has some kind of effect within the natural cycle, and is creating some warming. Now, there's no evidence for that whatsoever, because it's never been proven that carbon dioxide drives temperature. Now, these are basic things that most people can just find out, but these people never do it. And of course, I bet you voted for Trump. I bet you voted for Brexit. I bet you think Elvis lives on the dark side of the moon. You know, it's just unbelievable. And I've had it over the last couple of days, and I'm going to really expand on that on one of the Windows on the World shows, because it's so funny, right? It's so funny. This bloke talks about Brexit, and he's probably never been to Europe. Now, the funny thing is, I hadn't mentioned Brexit, but what they do is they attach so many side issues onto this thing. That's just an example. So in other words, that's where you get weather, climate and pollution all mixed together. In other words, oh God, that whale eating all that plastic, you know, but what's that got to do with the weather? You know, so they find a whale that's been stupid enough to eat all these bleeding plastic bottles, and they cut it open and they put a lot of plastic bottles inside a dead whale. It really doesn't matter. There are places in the world that are really, really polluted, right? And if you go parts of India, and you'll find, and obviously China, well, that's more environmental pollution. But the degradation of the land is a really bad thing, because you can't just keep chucking plastic bottles all over the place and that sort of thing. And that's what's happened in parts of India. And I've been in Nepal. It's parts of it are like that there. And that's mainly because of the Indians coming across the border who are just going there for short periods of time, basically taking what they can. And all these things are never addressed. The real causes of environmental degradation are not fully addressed. You don't get a good view of it. And then the general public who read The Guardian, shop in Waitrose and live in cities start advising you on their knowledge of climate change and environmentalism. And that's where we are at the moment.
Well, Tony Blair is going to be apparently an environmental advisor. And what does he know about the environment? I think you can sum that up with two words, sod all, basically. But we've had a very interesting comment in the chat room.
Yes, I'm looking at it.
Yes, sorry, I can't pronounce.
Imam Padama.
Got it in one. Sir Ian Boyd recently said that half Britain's farmland should be turned into wilderness. Is this related to the World Conservation Bank scheme to grab land in return for writing off government debt? That's interesting.
It absolutely is. And you try telling that to people who won't get it. Now, this rewilding thing is being put into all of these establishment, or basically, you could say these are mouthpieces for globalism. The Guardian, for instance, they print a lot of this stuff. Now, I did see that story today. So where did this useful idiot come from who's now suggesting that that's a good idea? Because I've been talking to a friend of mine in Somerset today, Sandy, who's not been too well. That's why she's not been on the shows yet. And she was saying the farmers are getting really upset there now because the NFU, the National Farmers Union, aren't listening to them. And all this rewilding stuff is going to devastate farming, as it has done in Australia. This is the thing. They're stopping meat production. That's why they want everyone on a vegetarian diet. Now, that's not for the good of everybody. That's because they are controlling the food supply. And also, a vegetarian kind of population is going to be more compliant. This is where these people think. This is a big plan, and this environmental movement is an absolute, what could you call it? It is a global action plan for control and management of everything, which is what we talk about through this thing called sustainable development.
Communism. And actually, it says, what we got here? I won't pronounce that. Land grab defo. That's right. And also, we've had another question. Is from Stephen, the truth seeker. Is Fukushima still leaking? I don't know. Do you know?
Well, there was something very interesting about that a while ago. I haven't really looked into it, but I remember this fascinating documentary about Fukushima when they went in there with these Geiger counters, and it's all deserted. For it's an absolute kind of wilderness now, and it looked a really fascinating place. But they went to the nuclear reactors, they got in and had a look, and they said at the time, and this was a long time ago, they were still leaking. But I don't know what to believe about the Fukushima thing. I really don't, because there's different aspects of it, and I think it's not something we can go into now. But I don't know whether it's still leaking. But I think according to the authorities here, they'd say it was still leaking, wouldn't they?
Well, precisely. Kath has come up.
But they keep saying that there's nuclear waste. It's kind of radiation. Sorry, not nuclear waste. Radiation is still being spread in the wind. You see. Now, I don't know whether any of that's true. I really don't. That's something that is, it's not something we can talk about, is it?
Well, when Sellafield leaked in the 1950s, I remember my parents talking about it. Apparently, Strontium 90, they told people not to drink milk, and they had to import milk for a long time because the cows are eating the grass and they were getting Strontium 90, which is, I don't know much about the nuclear industry, but it's supposed to be very bad for you and radioactive. And they had radioactive cows and radioactive milk. And apparently, on the television, I think it was probably I was too young to remember, or it was before I was born. They got a Geiger counter next to a glass of milk and it went off the scale. But Kath Holdsworth has just said something very interesting here. Fires are a sure way to arrange the land grab. Which is...
See, this is a really important point, Kath, because the thing is, if you start saying this to these environmentalists, they'll immediately call you a conspiracy theorist. And it's incredibly frustrating even trying to talk to them, because as soon as you stray into something which might be an agenda, they go, oh, conspiracy theory. And this is the dumbing down of the population. And this has been done through this environmentalism, because it's turned into an intolerant religion. So if you've got an intolerant religion, then you are going to get intolerant people, and also very ignorant people, because they won't accept anything outside their own narrative. And that's how we get these groups formed like Extinction Rebellion, because the people behind them are very clever. They know their target audience. They know what these people can and cannot accept. They know these people are very entitled. They're educated, but not very bright. They're usually urban dwelling people, and they want to be activists. They know they're very narcissistic, so they give them things to do which appeal to their narcissism, and they organize the protests for them. And this Extinction Rebellion lobby group has been extremely successful at lobbying our government and going above our government. So if it's going above our government with citizens' assemblies, then clearly there's something else going on. But you can't tell these people that. They just will not have it. And every time you mention Soros, they go, it's an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. No, it's business. It's business.
Let's think back. Throughout the 20th century, they had, well, I personally think that more people were killed by their own governments than all the wars put together. Now, how did these genocides happen? It's the same way as Agenda 2030 is going to happen. That's going to create a genocide. Because if you go up to people and talk about Agenda 2030, they're going, what? Is it on Coronation Street? Oh, they won't. They'll be too shallow to understand it, most people. And that's how dictators have got away with carrying out the worst genocides ever. Look at the Cultural Revolution, when academics, teachers, scientists were shown up in the street, then led away for execution. And who did it? It was children. They got children to actually, split on their parents, and it was horrendous. By the way, change the subject slightly. Crikey said my sound is low. In the chat room, is it low? I've just got the microphone closer to me. Please say if you can't hear me.
You sound a little bit low tonight, Chris. From me, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. I'll get the microphone very close to me. How's that? Let's hope that's a little bit better. Right. We've got in the chat room. Soros was a Nazi collaborator.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the thing is with George Soros, this is an interesting point, I think, about Soros, because first and foremost, these people are speculators. They're kind of, I don't want to compare him with Maurice Strong, who set up the 1987 World Wilderness Congress and then the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, because they're probably quite different characters. So I think it's unfair to compare them. But what they both seem to have in common is that they thought very big and they speculate on things, and everything's a business. So in other words, there's something within them that wants to keep manipulating things and making money, which in a way is an entrepreneurial thing. But with Soros, it's much darker. I still think Maurice Strong is quite a fascinating character, because he privatized all the water under his own land, which is basically what Agenda 21 is, and he got kicked out of Canada for doing it. And he ended up in China. He died in China. But the thing is, if you can see a documentary about Maurice Strong, and he's actually a quirky character. You can imagine him finding him very interesting. So it's about the intention. So I would say that with the environmental thing, that Maurice Strong, was a flawed character in certain ways because he couldn't help himself from wanting to make money. Do you know what I mean? He says, "Oh, wait a minute. He said, I want to save the world, but what if I privatise that? I can have it all, can't I? You know, well, that sounds good, doesn't it? You know, I can sell the water rights. You know." But I think it's a different mindset these people got. But with Soros, I find his agenda very insidious, because he funds these kind of minority groups that aren't really groups, and he uses them to agitate each other. I mean, and also a good comparison is with what's his name? Our friend, yes, Rio Earth Summit, Maurice Strong. So I'm a bit tired here, because Maurice Strong was very similar in his kind of way of rolling it out as a business, and very successful at that. But yeah, I mean, the thing is with this environmental thing is it's used. The environmental thing is used for an agenda. So in other words, the people who think they're environmentalists are being used for a control and management system, which they call a conspiracy theory. So that's why it's dangerous, I think.
Well, that's right. I mean, Paul Craven's mentioned something very important here. He says Pol Pot was following the plan for a self-sustaining agrarian society.
Agrarian, yeah.
Agrarians. I'm teeth again. Look,
it's meant to be agrarian. Agrarian, he says there, yeah.
Yeah. And that's quite interesting. Sorry, I asked divide and conquer specialists. Kath's just said, so true, Kath. Yeah. But you know, when you, I think there's another one that Kath mentioned here. Here it is. She said that people will end up. This is in Australia. Will end up grateful if burnt out of their homes for alternatives in city centre when the original homes have become too expensive with rates and insurance. That's spot on, and I've put 2 and 2 together and possibly made 100, and I've got no evidence for what I'm about to say. But isn't it strange that China is taking over Australia, and China is making a lot of cities that are empty, which is very strange, and they're actually building them in Africa now. So
yeah. Now this is an interesting thing, because that's happened in this country though, when the Somerset levels were flooded. Because what happens is, if your place is then designated to be on a floodplain, your insurance can go through the roof. This is where the land grabs happen, and this is what these environmental lunatics don't connect. They don't connect with this because they don't realise that it's basically a control system, and the way you get people off the land is make sure they can't afford to live on it. It's a little bit like what happened in the 1500s with the Erection of Cottages Act, and then you'd have to get permissions from your landlord, the feudal system, all the rest of it. And these laws started to get more draconian. You got the Enclosures Act, and then it went into the poor laws. So it's about a system of control, and this is kind of an updated version of that. But the thing is about it is that now you won't be able to keep animals. All production will go to these huge corporations, which are going to be used by the UN to distribute food worldwide, and there won't be any choice. But the thing is, you see, a lot of these urbanite kind of fake environmentalists who shop in Waitrose have got no idea how anything works. When we did a show in Hereford, all of those people there knew about farming, and they got their meat from the local butchers. There were local butchers. Now, these people who live in cities, who go and sit on the pavement and do yoga in Westminster and do die-ins at Waitrose, don't know anything about how production and farming works. So they're the target audience, and there's a lot of them, but they're the ones who are ultimately going to lose the most, because they're the ones who are owning property in cities and all the rest of it. And the Agenda 21 thing is about redistribution of wealth. It's to destroy what used to be called the middle classes.
Well, they've been doing that since Thatcher came in, and the Berlin Wall came down, and the communism moved from the east to the west. And when I'm talking about communism moving from the east to the west, it reinvented itself, and the oligarchs moved wholesale. Russia is no longer Soviet or communist at all. But really, this idea of driving you out, financially driving you out of your home is very true. I found the other day an old receipt, I suppose you could call it, from 1999. Okay, so just over 20 years ago, and council tax as over doubled since then. Now, have wages gone up double since then? No, they haven't. So what we're paying for in council tax really is the council workers' pensions, because a chancellor, Gordon Brown, kindly dipped into the pensions pot and sold gave all our gold away to the Rothschilds, which was very good of him, you know. So really, we are being priced out of our homes. But again, people can't see it because it's like boiling the frog. You know, if you put a frog in boiling water, it jumps straight out. But if you put it in
well, it has to work like that, yeah, because people won't accept things straight away. So now they're being conditioned to the destruction of farming in the UK by saying that we shouldn't be eating meat. The whole thing is very obvious. But what I don't understand about this sometimes is that why can't the public put two and two together? There doesn't seem to be any joined up thinking going on, because all of a sudden meat is the enemy. Now, we've had this vegetarian thing for quite a long time and veganism, but it was never militant as it is now. You used to get like the animal rights activists, but now it's a militant agenda that's in the mainstream. So why don't people join the dots? And I'll say these things to people about this agenda of how it joins up. And what I always say is, well, you do realize the current environmental movement came out of the ideas of an oil billionaire. And they go, oh, I suppose you think Elvis lives on the dark side of the moon. You know, this is the sort of reaction you get. They don't seem to be able to understand how this could work. Because if you're going to control the population, you need to get them to believe that they're doing the right thing. It's so blatantly obvious. And a lot of these people in the so-called middle classes, they're so smug with themselves that they'd rather be completely condescending and block you, like they did the other day when somebody told me, that's right, they came up on the thread and said, oh, I know people who've gone to the World Wilderness Conference, but they've never seen any oil billionaires there. I said, well, I'll send you the link from when it started up in 1987. Who started it? Maurice Strong. What did they set up in 1987? The Global Environmental Facility, which is this arm of the World Bank. The World Bank is a trustee of it, and what that does is basically take over infrastructure. It lends money to poor countries when they can't pay it back through the mitigation and the solar panels. They lend them all the money to get the renewables that won't work, and then they've got a lien on the country. They can take the debt back. They can take an asset. It's really simple, and this happens all the time. This is the way banks work. So I don't understand why these lunatics don't understand the basics of it. It doesn't make any sense to me, because they come up with things like, well, you can't make money by just land grabbing. No, it's not about that. It's about the control and management of population. You know, I really find that annoying with them. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you. I mean, I used to be a vegetarian. I went vegan at one time. I'm meat eater now, because I realized it was one of the most unhealthiest diets you could wish to have. And I lacked energy all the time. And really, I try and eat a caveman diet. But what I did find is that with the vegetarian diet, you get a lot of fake processed food to look like bacon and look like, you know, meat products. And in my view, they are carcinogenic, very carcinogenic. And especially soya. You've got to avoid soya like the plague. It's okay, soy sauce, but soya itself product is synthetic and it is carcinogenic. And I think it's almost as bad as tobacco and that type of thing. So really, I suppose there's another way of finishing people off, because people say, well, I can't get the meat, but I think I'd have this soya product or artificial steak or whatever. And what they don't realize is what they're eating is very, very dangerous, because you've got to get back to natural food as much as possible. And
well, I think it's because these people in cities are kind of brainwashed into it. It's kind of interesting, the whole thing. But yeah, it's this kind of resistance to fact I find really strange, that you present facts. I think this is the key to it in a way, because that's how things like this Extinction Rebellion can take hold. Because what they do is just they plant these quotes and memes into people, and this is exactly what they do, these protest groups like whose streets, our streets, what do we want, a sustainable future, when do we want it now, these meaningless mantras. And in a way, when they go like 97% of scientists agree, but what do they agree on? They can never tell you what they agree on, because that came out of a paper that was put into the UN, and it was just basically on their consensus that certain scientists believed that we had an effect on global warming. I think I covered that earlier on, but the point is that when you've got people who just repeat things, they will not take in anything that's outside their belief system, you know. And that this is what I find extraordinary about it. And also, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the idea that people can think straight if they're not getting enough protein, I think is completely wrong. I've got a very high metabolism. I need a lot of food. I eat quite a lot, and I expend quite a lot of energy. Not as much as I used to. I used to expend much more energy, but I'm still very energetic, and I need a lot of protein. I can't think otherwise, but I actually do a lot of thinking. And what I noticed is my friends who are vegan and that, I'll say things to them, they can't keep up with me. They seem to miss things, you know, like get things wrong. I don't know, general. I want to see if there's anyone who's vegan out there who can contradict that, because I don't want to pigeonhole people, but I think it's to do with the way you absorb things, your metabolism as well. I have a very sort of high metabolism that I need a lot of energy. You know, I used to do gigs, and I would go out, leave the house, take all my stuff in the van, jump up and down for 2 hours singing, and then drive back, and I'd have to have something like a kebab, you know. Well, maybe I should, but it's that level of energy. I think it's a real problem, and I'm sure that's what the agenda is. They want a compliant population. How do you get them compliant? Well, you can use kind of artificial things like vaccination. You can put it in food. You can put lithium in water. But if you stop people eating a lot of protein, then, you know, and protein that's properly absorbed by the system, like meat, then you've got a very compliant population, I think. Well, just an idea. I may be wrong, you know.
I mean, I haven't done any gigs or anything like that because I'm not a variety artist, but I have a high metabolism, and that. And
a variety artist.
No, well, you know,
come here. My mother-in-law. Come here. My mother-in-law.
So I don't know something like that. You know, I don't go on stage or anything like that. I haven't got those skills, but I've got very high metabolism, and you know, I ate have to eat, you know, quite a bit. Even though I'm only 10.5 stone and 5'7". But the thing that gets me is, for example, I was speaking to somebody the other day who's a BBC brainwashed, and I said, well, I don't believe in all this sort of man-made environment. Oh, I do. I've seen David Attenborough. I've seen the way things are dying. So I said, well, hang on a moment. Is David Attenborough a scientist? Oh, but he knows what he's talking about. I said, no. Is he a scientist? I said, because I know of a scientist called Piers Corbyn. Oh, I don't like Corbyn, you know, I didn't vote for him. So I said, no, I said, it's his brother, Piers Corbyn. We're not talking about politics. We're not talking about the Labour Party. We're talking about his brother, who is an actual scientist, who studied this. You know, he's got his own website with the UN phoning. And
no, say somebody else.
When I said that, I could have been saying anything. I could have said Mickey Mouse lives on the moon. She just did not hear that and said, "Oh, but you've got to watch Attenborough." And I said, "Yeah, but why don't you go on the internet and look up, Piers Corbyn?" Yeah, well, if you see Actionable, blah, 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 and they just do not hear what you're saying. That is the problem, you know.
Yeah, I know. It's unbelievable. I'm just let me text this person. I'll say, yeah, it says, I don't usually do this on air, but we're having a relaxed one tonight, aren't we? Yeah.
All right. Well, after, was it last night's one where everything possible to go wrong did go wrong, and I do apologise for
that. Was unbelievable, wasn't it, that?
It was like the internet of the 1990s when it first came out. And little tip, if you're on the internet, change the little gizmo that goes into the wall. Was it the filter? Because I found out you got to change them about every 6 to 9 months. And and also they found out I had a slow internet connection, So they did something. I don't know whether they got a new hamster on the wheel or plugged something in, and touch wood, it seems to be working tonight, you know.
Yeah, well, that's great, because last night, I mean, we did quite a long one. I kept saying to people in chat, what does it sound like? I said, oh, it's a bit jumpy, Mark, but it's what we can hear you. I played it back. I thought, I wouldn't have listened to this. But it was a really good show. It was a really good one last night as well. I've got loads of information, but I'll have to put that information out again, you know.
Well, I was being it sounds pixelated. You know, you see these pixelated, you know, this person robbed a bank. There's also, it's terrible. It really is. But what's this got here? Kath says 100. Grains create carbs which turn to sugar and become carcinogenic, which is very interesting.
Yeah, I don't eat wheat anymore at all, really. I don't eat bread. Yeah.
I do. I still eat bread, but I'm trying to avoid sugar. Because I'm addicted to it. That's the problem. Most of us are addicted to sugar. Tea as well. I get up in the morning and I've got to have a cup of tea because I get a chronic headache otherwise, because I'm addicted to the caffeine. And you know, I think probably if tea had been discovered now, that it'd be a class A drug or something.
Oh yeah, it'd be really bad for you, that.
Yeah. But we've got some quite interesting comments in the chat room. We got here. Yuri Bezmenov, Kroyoki, if I've pronounced that correctly. Kroiki,
yeah.
Kroiki. Bezmenov already said how impossible it is to reach brainwashed individuals.
Yeah, this is a great point, because I've watched the Yuri Bezmenov stuff and I do refer to it because I learned a lot from listening to him, and also through FSB teachers on YouTube. Now, interestingly, those Russians that I quoted the other night, who were talking about Greta Thunberg, they spoke in such direct and easy language, and they nailed exactly what she was. They're saying, this is abuse, she's being controlled, she's mentally ill, and this is for an agenda, right? Just laid it out. It's dead simple, right? Yeah. Now, if you said that, go, oh, why do white men hate Greta Thunberg? it's the most ridiculous thing to say, like, because no one's going to hate her, are they? You know, go, why do white middle-aged men hate Greta Thunberg? And it's like, well, no, they don't. They probably hate her really disgusting parents who were exploiting her, you know, or the people behind her. I mean, it's just absolutely absurd. But I think this is part of the problem, because as you say, you can't get through to brainwashed people, and it don't get any more brainwashed than that, you know.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's true what Kath says here. Also, it is really hard to get folks who still watch TV to see truth and have open minds. That is 100% true. I mean, I got rid of my television about 10 years ago. Best thing I ever did. Never missed it.
Well, that's the thing as well, isn't it? You do find that. Well, if that was true, I'm sure I'd know about it. And this is what people say. Well, wait a minute. Like,
David Attenborough would tell you that.
You know, I don't profess to know that much at all. But when you start talking to these people, you realise they actually know nothing about anything. They can't even talk about anything, you know.
Professor Brian Cox is a typical example, as thick as two, in my view, as thick as two short planks.
Well, I think that's being a bit generous there, Chris.
Well, he just reads books. I've actually worked with that sort of type, and I kid you not. Okay, this is 100% true. I worked with a chap that had so many qualifications. I mean, they were just brimming with qualifications, because mummy and daddy, I think, probably paid for his education. And one day, it was a very, very hot July day, and we needed to keep the door open to have a little bit of a draft going through the office. So what do? You make a paper wedge. Well, I would say everybody here in the chat room that would know how to make a paper wedge. You just fold it up, fold it over, shove it in. And he stood there and put just an ordinary sheet of paper under the door. It closed. Yes. Then he opened the door again. Then he folded it over, and the door went straight over the folded paper. And someone had to go over and show him how to make a folded wedge. And this man is a qualified structural engineer. Or was. Yeah, I kid you not. He couldn't work out how to make a paper wedge to wedge the door open. And
yeah, I know. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I do know quite a lot of academics, and some of them are very good at certain things, but they can't do joined up thinking. I find most of them can't do joined up thinking at all. They can't see that the link between things or make links between things.
That's right.
You know, that's what I find out, because that's the idea of the academic process. It's so that you specialize in one area. But in order to actually be good at something and to have an overall, to have a view of something, you have to be able to have comparative studies of lots of things. And I just find this is a huge problem with them. And you try and explain things that just doesn't work. But yeah, I don't think intellectuals are the problem with the climate thing. I think the general public and television and the brainwashing level. I think what it is, they don't want to believe that they're being scammed. They pay taxes, they work, they have difficult lives, a lot of people, and they don't want to think that they're being ultimately lied to by all authority. And that's it, really. I don't think they can handle it, because it's always an appeal to authority as an argument. So in other words, they go 97% of scientists agree, which of course they don't, and agree on what they can't tell you. They also think that everything that they're told about a climate emergency is happening. Well, of course it's not happening. There's no such thing as a climate emergency. The weather systems of the planet wouldn't allow a climate emergency. There may be climate events, but certainly not a climate emergency. I think we've lost Chris there, but I think I might read out some of these things. They're very, very funny.
I'm still here.
Just lost you there for a minute, yeah.
Really? Oh, well, probably it was a climate emergency. I had in my brain, you know.
Well, yeah, I was talking about the climate emergency. You just weren't listening, Chris.
Sorry.
Yeah, this is really good stuff. Population will inevitably and completely outstrip whatever small increases in food supplies we make. The death rate will increase until at least 100 to 200 million per year will be starving to death during the next 10 years. Now, that was in 1975, right? Now, the thing is that is the plan. This is what they want to introduce. So it's funny that they make these predictions, and then the predictions are part of the agenda. You know, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. I suppose you think Elvis lives on the dark side of the moon, don't you? Yeah.
Well, you said that's 1975. That is around about that time that the film Soylent Green came out, which is rather interesting.
Hang on a minute, Chris. Soylent Green is people. He was doing it to his fist, wasn't he?
Yeah.
With like one of these on it.
Yeah. Soylent Green.
I can't get it in the camera now. Soylent Green is people. I always like doing that. Yeah.
It's the world's disaster move. Is that because they were in the American military? We know that Hollywood, who controls Hollywood, and the American military have a large input into it, and of course the New World Order, because they want to change.
Is this another one of your conspiracy theories, Chris?
Oh yeah,
those are the New World Order. Is what's who runs the New World Order then? Come on, who runs the New World Order? Oh, I bet it's George Soros, isn't it? Yeah, I bet he does it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose you voted Brexit. I suppose you support Trump. I suppose you want a third world war.
I used to work with a fella, a Canadian bloke, who was really politically correct, totally politically correct. I think we said this in a previous program. He probably went on one of these courses. And when you were talking, generally in the office, he would be like monitoring. The attitude was that we were all nasty people that had a lot of hate within us, and we tried to hold that hate back, and we were racially prejudiced. We hated everybody. But well,
this is psychology, isn't it? This is where it came from, psychology. It's this assumption by people like Sigmund Freud, you know, and that basically they don't qualify people with any higher intelligence. This is what the idea is, to bring you down to the level of an animal, and the stupid things that Freud came out with. I mean, that was ridiculous, you know.
Well, this character,
I've read it all. Terrible.
It accused me of being a communist, a Nazi, anti-Semitic. What was the other one there? Oh, there's loads of them. Became
fascist.
All in one day. So I sort of asked him, I said, well, what should I do? Should I change the colour of my shoes or something? You know, and there's a Jewish chap there. And we had all different nations, all different people there. And we used to have a right old laugh because we were all contract blokes. And I heard the best Jewish jokes from this Jewish bloke. And he said, yeah, I'm anti-Semitic as well. Do you know that? Yeah. And everybody said it's a bit like that scene from Spartacus. You know, I'm Spartacus. It was, yes, I'm anti-Semitic. Yes, I'm anti-Semitic. I mean,
yeah, well, this is it. I mean, it's funny all that, because you find a lot of people who are like ordinary Jews don't even know any of this stuff. You know, it's like it's totally alien to them, really. All this anti-Semitism stuff. I was talking to a lady in Walthamstow, and I think it's a friend of mine, Teresa Achilleos. She's a Greek lady, and she used to go. You can actually see her on one of our films. I think it's Agenda 21, and North London, Agenda 21 in North London, and she's going around. She had a little dog called Pluto, and she used to go around this mobility scooter. And her friend Pam Porritt was Jewish lady, and she goes, "There's no bleeding anti-Semitism in Britain. What the fuck are they talking about?" You know. But you try telling that to people who were surrounding Jeremy Corbyn, you know.
Well, I've told you this before. There's a German bloke in there, and it was at the time when Hello Hello was on television. And we used to go up to it, and he had a trick, he says, "Take these plans. We will say this only once." And he spent the weekend in Germany. He came back with a backache. And the Jewish bloke went over to him. He said, "Look, that backache is caused with all that goose stepping, you know. Now, can you imagine saying that today? Where it's always hysterical laughter. Nobody is upset. All except one person."
Well, that's the thing. You see, the thing is with the Brave New World thing is that it means that nobody can express themselves. You have to stamp out individuality. And the way you stamp out individuality is you put people in fear of stepping out of line. It's very, very simple, this stuff. It's a psychological warfare, really. It comes out of the idea of psychological warfare. And I found this slideshow, which I used to use an example, actually, in a talk. And it was allegedly from GCHQ. And it was about controlling the narrative. And they were looking for what they call cyber magicians, people on the internet. And it had a fellow, like a magician, with cards, spraying cards from one hand to the other. And it had all these examples of how you deceive people. And it was really, really interesting. And I've kept it as an example of how this kind of program works, because most of this stuff is psychological. In fact, there is nothing that's being enforced that isn't psychological. It's all psychological warfare. And if you start looking at counterintelligence, the way this stuff works, this is where I started to learn an awful lot about it, because it's all based on this psychology, which came out of Freud, Sigmund Freud, I call him, and the Tavistock Institute, and his daughter, Anna Freud, she kind of stayed on there. And it was all about how to deal with people who had post-traumatic stress disorder during the Second World War. That's you know, between the First and Second World Wars, that was when it really started. Because it wasn't originally called the Tavistock Institute, but the Tavistock Institute was founded just for that purpose, really. It was looking into the results of psychological stress through warfare. Now, that's when you start looking into it, and then you go into these programs and you get people MK Ultra and all this stuff. But in actual fact, the mind control thing is very, very simple. It's just that you create an accepted arena of opinion, and everything outside it is demonized. It's very, very simple. And also, what I've found is that day before rather, when I threw these sort of truth bombs into the Guardian reading numpties, and they all started attacking me, that basically what they're doing is the way they respond is the way that a sort of psychological warfare person would respond. In other words, they start with ad hominems, and I suppose you're this and I suppose you're that. And what they're doing is they're using psychological warfare. And these people are basically just doing the job of the state, you know. But the arrogance that that's why I think the problem in this country is that these middle classes are so bloody arrogant. They know nothing. I mean, if you go to other countries, I've never seen that in other countries. You see snobbery, you know. You get it actually in India with the caste system. You get that sort of thing quite a lot, you know. But that's something that's imposed on them from above. But what you've got in this country, there's no real excuse for it, because you've got these kind of, they're also willfully stupid, you know. They like being dumb. And I think that's it's incredible that people have accepted this in such a short period of time. That's what I'd say anyway.
Well, that's right. And the next step, if people don't open their eyes, is what happened in China and also the Soviet Union, where there'll be millions of people killed, and people go, "Oh, really?" And they'll probably see people dragged off and taken away in a lorry. Oh, well, they were criminals anyway. They're doing the best for us, and that's that's what people will believe, because it's surprising how, unless it affects the person individually, they won't bother. And as I've said many times,
this is my point. You see that the public think small, globalists think big. Globalists think big, and public think small, and most people think really small, and we all do. We're conditioned to, but the point is that some people think smaller than others. Some people think minuscule small.
Has just come up with a good one here. I didn't know this. Yeah. He says the guy who owns Netflix is related to Freud and Bernays.
Yeah, someone sent me a message. It might have been Paul who sent me that, actually. Yeah, well, that doesn't surprise me, because this thing about there's a sort of elite structure going on. I've always found this very interesting, actually, because working in film and documentary, I decided to do my own thing, because you talk about Netflix. I mean, I made a documentary, got it on Amazon Prime, and all of these things are very, very controlled, and they're controlled by a lot of interests which have a political agenda. And that's the whole point. When people say, "Oh, I'm not programmed by television and films," well, you are, because the people who own all of this stuff have got an agenda. This is the thing that it's very apparent when you watch Hollywood movies, that there is an agenda being put into it, and in television. And people who watch it all the time will absolutely deny that. That's a big problem, isn't it, Chris?
Well, that's right. Monty Mole's come up with a good one here. Gervais is controlled and allowed to say what he did. I 100% agree.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, because
I think we talked about that last night, didn't we?
That's right. Good old Ricky, he knows his stuff there, didn't he? And he gets you on your side.
See, the thing is, if you've got something like the Epstein thing going on, you have to if you think about it, that could get out of control. So you gatekeep it and let someone like him make those suggestions. So it's like, is it funny, or are we meant to laugh? And the thing is that he's the allowed voice of dissent. You have to have room for rebels in these systems. There has to be room for a bit of, it's like, so what do you want to rebel against? Oh, you want to do a people's assembly? We'll take you all to London, give you your signs, tell you what to rebel against. We'll take the signs off, you recycle them, take you back home on the bus, and nothing ever happens. But you had a good day out, didn't you? It's basically the same thing. It's just controlling a narrative. And people don't realize that people like him are there to control the narrative, because if he was a real renegade, you'd never see him on television again, ever. He would not be allowed on. He'd go like that overnight. His career would be gone. If he truly laid into them, his career would be finished. Absolutely. So what he did was very controlled, I thought, and contrived. Yeah.
It's very clever. And Eman Sudama, I hope I've pronounced that correctly.
Eman Pudama.
I'll get it right.
Or maybe I've got it wrong.
I don't know. Piers Morgan is a prime example of someone with pseudo controversial opinions that fall within narrow boundaries. Spot on.
Well, yeah, and he's not even got controversial opinions. What you've got there, I don't watch this daytime television stuff, but I have seen him with that girl on these YouTube things. So what she does is she's the middle-class Marxist idiot, right? And he's the allowed kind of middle right-wing, centre-right kind of person who's meant to bring a bit of common sense. It's a good cop, bad cop routine, and it's very dull. Yeah.
Well, that's right. I mean, let's face it. I mean, it gives me the impression that he's had a brain transplant that rejected him, because he's got no personality at all. So, and I find him boring. I mean, he's got.
Well, he's boring. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
Yeah, he's boring. Yeah.
How are we going to wrap this up for tonight? Because it's really quite an interesting program. And thanks for coming on, Mark. And I'm glad that, touchwood again, that everything is hopefully worked out right tonight. And again, apologise for our last broadcast, which was done on, I think, 1999 internet speeds. So I'll leave the last word to you, Mark. What do you think? How can we change things for the better? I know you said last night we've got to hit these people with truth and facts, but the big problem is when you speak to people, they sort of dumb out, go, when you mention the truth to them, their brain sort of switches off and they go back to their sort of like little bit of poetry that they've they recite to you. It's like a kind of an agenda that they've been programmed with, like that.
Well, of course, yeah. I mean, I think the thing is about the idea of real citizens' assemblies. These citizens' assemblies are contrived. They are the last bit of brainwashing that they need. It's absolutely absurd that they're using consensus and this Delphi technique. Basically, the citizens' assemblies are going to be rolled out all over the country as they are, and they're going to get the public to accept their houses being retrofitted for up to £25,000, which they just did in Oxford. They're going to take out loans to get all this. There's going to be property grabs. There's going to be huge poverty on the back of this Green New Deal types in the build, the build up to it. Now, the thing is that if you start opposing this at a local level, but properly, you don't need many people. How many people's on a people's assembly? 50 people. If you can get a small group, you can take over those citizens' assemblies. You can actually form your own and say, you do not represent us. We are the people. The people you have on that citizens' assembly are vested interest lobbyists, as they were in Oxford. The people on that citizens' assembly knew nothing about climate change. One was a computer modeler, the rest are lobbyists for renewables, and one was a girl who looked about 18. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but what she said was utter garbage, right? So this is, I think, a very good way to attack it, because this environmental thing that's being brought in is being brought on the back of a kind of psychological warfare plan. So I think the thing to do is start forming your own people's assemblies. And we do our talks around the country, the real people's assembly, giving the information out. But I think to have some fun and start going for these local councils and really start pulling it apart, you don't need that many people to do it. And that would be a start, I think, because you can wake the public up a bit more as to what's going on locally. Very difficult in this country. That's one solution. So, that we've only got a couple of minutes. There's other things we can talk about, but I think that's a good one. The real people's assembly, or the real citizens' assembly, if you prefer to be a citizen.
That's right. And also out to have a laugh, because I think because it's all serious. We don't have laughter now.
Oh yeah.
So I think we've got to have a laugh at them, because you can't have a laugh with them because they're too stupid. And as I've said many times before, counter-subversion. They're using ideological subversion on us. Let's turn it round and push it back on them.
Well, that's what I did the other day. Yeah, that's what I did the other day with those people. I went in on the attack. Then I started getting really polite with them as they got more insulting. Like, don't listen to him. He voted Brexit. He's Boris Johnson's mess mate. Then it turned into people like him really annoy me that they've been allowed to vote. Can you see what this is like? So all of a sudden they're saying people like me should be allowed to vote because I gave them some information which was outside their own experience. Now this is dangerous stuff, and these sort of fake Marxists and people who are hive mind mentored like this are very dangerous, because they are a hive mind. So yes, the way to interrupt that is with facts and with humor, because that's in my view, a way to kind of kickstart things. And I really enjoy doing it. So yeah, that's fun.
Well, that's right. If you if you go onto my website, and here it is now, you can see a 25-page document I put into the council that was done humorously. If you want a good laugh, I did it a couple of years ago. And the local paper contacted me, and then the Daily Mirror contacted me, and they had it in there. And I didn't really want to get into the newspapers because I don't read newspapers. I don't really like newspapers, but they did a pretty good write-up, so I can't complain. And also, always remember that Mark Windows every Sunday at 9 p.m, and that can be found not on here, but on windowsontheworld.net. And don't do what I did, put Windows on the World and then forgot the .net and found out loads and loads of stuff about the Sears Tower and the windows up there. So,
well, this is right. Yeah, that you do get the restaurant that used to be at the top of one of the twin towers, wasn't it? Yeah, I think the north one. I'm not sure.
Well, thanks for joining us, Mark. And okay, for next Thursday, I think we could make this a regular spot if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we the thing is with this live stream, it's kind of interesting. We're in early days with it, and I think it can be very, very useful. And it's great that people come in. This interactive thing is something that we were missing before. I was tending to put out big chunks of information, but in actual fact, if we do this with a kind of theme and the intention behind, lots of things can be brought in. And I think that's great, because I thought that one we did last night, I really enjoyed it. Shame about the sound. But I've got loads of information to put out, and really do try and book our talks. You know, book one for your local area, and we'll come along, or I'll come along. If we can't, all three of us get there, I'll come along. And this, I think, is a very interesting thing, because it's starting to find out what's going on all over the country. Same template everywhere, so templates are quite easy to break. And I think that's probably the way that we should be thinking, and the way that our times are going. We're living in this controlled hive of enforced opinion, and it's time to break out of it, you know.
Well, before we go, Cryoki said, do you guys see the spiritual aspect of this stuff? Which is quite interesting.
Yeah, it's a big picture, and it depends how far you want to go with it. What we tend to do is keep things fairly down to earth. Now, I go into a lot of this stuff, the supernatural. I think that there is a lot of that going on different levels, and we should get into that in another show. I do believe all this stuff very strongly, because I've studied parapsychology, I've had out-of-body experiences, I've also had lots of paranormal experiences through my life, and yes, it's all very important, but the spiritual side of it is the battle, because that's the inner core of what you really are. In actual fact, with anything where you're looking for truth, it has to be that. The reason I don't use the word spiritual is because the New Agers have hijacked it. Their idea of spiritual is sort of blissing out on fake New Age ideologies, and indulging themselves in narcissism. So in other words, being spiritual isn't having a gong bath.
Well, that's right. I'm very careful. I mean, I don't class myself as being religious, but I do believe that I'm spiritual, and I do believe in karma, very much so. And I think there's an energy, but none of us know what that energy is. There is definitely an energy there, but I don't know what it is, but I respect it. And on that note, talking about things like that, tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, I'm on this same channel live with Ben, and guess what we're going to be talking about? Demonic possession. So that's
demonic possession. Yeah, we've done a few shows on that.
Yes, so we'll be talking about that for about an hour. So thanks for joining us tonight, Mark, and thank you everybody in the chat room. I'm sorry I couldn't read out all your comments, but I do my best, because it's a bit difficult to be talking to Mark and then looking at the chat room at the same time. But thank you very much for joining us, and join us tomorrow, and also join Mark on Sunday and me tomorrow, and also next week with Mark. Thank you very much. And
I'm live on Wednesdays, 8 p.m. With us on the world. Okay. I'm going to keep that one up, actually, because I do enjoy it.
It's great. Thank you very much. Good night.
Right.